The legend was old. Most coalition scholars believed it was fiction. It appeared in 3 separate archive systems under different names: the Pale Builders, the Bone Shapers, the ones who burned their own sun. All 3 descriptions pointed to the same species, a bipedal race from a single, unremarkable planet in a quiet spiral arm of the Milky Way. They had no hive mind, no natural armor, no regenerative biology. According to the oldest records, they lived less than a century each and spent most of that time fighting one another. The legend said they had gone silent 300 years ago. Most coalition scholars said good riddance. Counselor Ion had read the legend exactly once, during her 2nd year of diplomatic training, and had not thought about it since. She had larger concerns. The Thavari seat on the Coalition Council came with 17 active trade disputes, 2 border conflicts, and a permanent headache behind her left eye that no medicine had ever fully touched. She was reviewing a water rights complaint from the Voreth delegation when her assistant stepped into the chamber without knocking. That alone told her something was wrong. "Counselor," his voice was flat, the kind of flat that meant he was working very hard to sound calm. "Long-range sensors at Relay Station 4 have detected an anomaly." Ion set down her documents. "Define anomaly." "Vessels dropping from faster-than-light travel approximately 9 light minutes past the outer boundary marker." "How many?" He checked his tablet, checked it again. "Current count is 11,412. The number is still rising." Ion stood up. The transit to the sensor hub took 6 minutes. By the time she arrived, the count had climbed to 14,000. The room was full of coalition officers standing very still and saying very little, which was its own kind of alarm. Voreth Subcommander Reth was already there, his 4 arms crossed tight against his chest, staring at the central display like he could intimidate it into showing something different. "Configuration?" Ion asked. The lead sensor officer pulled up the formation. "Unknown. The hull geometry does not match any registered species. Energy signatures are outside our classification bands entirely." He paused. "They are not powering weapons. They are not moving. They are just sitting there." "Sitting," Reth repeated. The word came out like an insult. For 2 hours the fleet did nothing. No approach vector. No communication attempt. No change in formation. 15,000 vessels, the final count settled at 15,008, arranged themselves in a rough arc and waited with a patience that felt almost deliberate, like they wanted the coalition to have time to look at them. Then the transmission came. It was short. 4 words, repeated on a loop across 17 different frequency bands, in a language that the coalition's translation systems flagged as extinct. "We need to talk." The junior analyst who found the archive entry was named Sav. She was 22 years old, on her 3rd week of a records cataloging assignment, and she would later say that the match came up almost by accident. She had been cross-referencing extinct language databases against the transmission frequency pattern when the system returned a result with a confidence rating of 94%. Language of origin, human, status, extinct. Last recorded transmission 301 years prior. She stared at the result for a long time before she sent it up the chain. When it reached Ion, the counselor read the attached legend file for the 2nd time in her life. She read it more carefully this time. The descriptions of their wars. The accounts from species who had encountered them during their early expansion period. Erratic, relentless, deeply strange in the way they attached meaning to abstract ideas like honor and home. One Voreth military historian, writing roughly 400 years ago, had described them as the only species he had ever studied that seemed genuinely indifferent to their own survival odds. He had not meant it as a compliment. Reading it now, Ion was not sure it wasn't one. "They're waiting for a response," Reth said. He had not moved from the display. "Every minute we don't answer is a minute they choose not to act. I do not like being at the patience of something I cannot classify." "Then we answer," Ion said. "With what? We don't know what they want." They told us what they want. She looked at the transmission still scrolling across the secondary screen. They want to talk. Reth made a sound that translated roughly as deep skepticism. 1,400 and something warships do not travel to the edge of Coalition space to talk. 15,000, the sensor officer corrected quietly. Reth turned and looked at him. The officer found something important to study on his tablet. Ion drafted the response herself. Short, neutral in the extinct language the translation system had reconstructed from archive records. She did not threaten. She did not welcome. She simply acknowledged receipt and offered coordinates for a meeting point at the diplomatic station on the edge of the Thavari system. The reply came in 40 seconds. One word. Confirmed. Ion stood in the quiet of the sensor hub and looked at the display. 15,000 vessels, motionless, waiting. 300 years of silence ending with 4 words and then one. No demands, no aggression, no attempt to impress or intimidate beyond the simple, undeniable fact of their presence. Whatever the humans had become in 3 centuries, they had learned patience. That, more than anything else, was what made the headache behind Ion's left eye feel suddenly, significantly worse. The diplomatic station had hosted 43 first contact events in its long history. None of them had felt like this. Station staff had spent the previous 18 hours preparing a reception hall capable of accommodating up to 12 different atmospheric requirements, adjusting gravity plating, and reviewing every known protocol for meetings with unknown species. They had also, quietly and without being asked, moved all non-essential personnel to the far end of the station. Nobody ordered them to, they just did it. The human vessel that docked was small. A single ship, compact and dark-hulled, with geometry that looked less designed and more like it had been grown, every surface curved in a way that made it hard to look at directly, like the eye kept sliding off. It made no sound during docking. Most ships groaned or clicked as they settled into the clamps. This one was silent. 3 humans walked through the airlock. Counselor Ion had prepared herself. She had studied the archive images, old footage, grainy and poorly preserved, of the species before they vanished. She knew their approximate size, their bilateral symmetry, the strange flatness of their faces. She had not prepared for how still they were. The one in front was a woman. She was not tall by Coalition standards, not physically imposing, not armed in any visible way. She wore a dark uniform with no decoration except a single small insignia on her collar. She looked at Ion the way someone looks at a problem they have been studying for a long time and are finally seeing in person, with recognition, not surprise. Counselor Ion, she said in clean Coalition standard, not accented, not hesitant, fluent. Ion's translator had nothing to do. I am Admiral Sira Voss. The woman gestured to the 2 behind her. Captain Dren Holt, Navigator Priya Os. She paused. We appreciate the prompt response. Subcommander Reth, standing 2 steps behind Ion, said exactly what Ion had asked him not to say. You speak our language. Sira looked at him, several of them actually. How? We have been listening to Coalition communications for approximately 112 years. She said it without apology, without emphasis, the way someone states the temperature outside. We did not make contact earlier because we were not ready. We are ready now. The silence in the room had texture. Ion recovered first. She gestured toward the meeting table. Please. They sat. Ion noticed that all 3 humans positioned themselves with a clear sightline to the door and a clear view of every other person in the room. It was not aggressive. It was automatic, like breathing. Sira placed a small device on the table and activated it. A star map bloomed above the surface, Coalition space rendered in precise detail, more detailed than anything the Coalition's own public maps showed. Borders, trade routes, fleet positions. Ion recognized restricted military data in that display, data that should not have been accessible to any outside party. You have been inside our systems, Reth said. His voice was low. We have been watching, Sira said. There is a difference. We did not alter anything. We did not transmit anything. We observed because we needed to understand who we were coming back to. She let him absorb that, then continued. We are not here to threaten you. We are not here to negotiate territory or resources. We are here because of this. She moved her hand and the map shifted. Coalition space shrank to one corner. The rest of the display filled with a region Ion did not recognize, a broad stretch of systems beyond the outer rim, systems that should have been populated, that were on old charts as active civilizations. They were dark, all of them, 17 systems silent as stone. We call it the veil, Sira said. The silence has been spreading for 40 years. These were not dead systems when the silence began. They had populations, infrastructure, signals. She looked around the table. Then nothing. Natural phenomenon, one of Ion's advisors offered. Dren Holt, the captain, made a small sound. Not a laugh, something quieter than that. No, Sira said. What caused it does not negotiate and does not stop. It moves through a system, and when it leaves, nothing organic remains. No bodies, no ruins, the structures stay, the biology goes. She paused. We have seen it before. That is why we left our home 300 years ago. The room processed that. Priya Osa had not spoken once. She was young, younger than Ion had expected, and she sat with her hands flat on the table, watching the coalition delegates with calm, careful eyes. Now she spoke for the first time quietly. It consumed our planet in 11 days. We had 6 months of warning. That is the only reason any of us survived. Ion looked at the dark systems on the map, then back at Sira. Why come to us? If you have an armada of 15,000 warships, why do you need the coalition? Sira's expression did not change. Because what is coming has more mass than anything we have ever fought alone, and we are honest about our own limits. She folded her hands on the table. We do not need your ships. We need your space. We need to fight this battle here where we can use the terrain, and we need you to stay out of our way when we do. Ion studied her, and if we refuse? Sira looked at the dark systems on the map for a moment. Then those systems will not be the last ones on that list, she said, and you will face what comes next without us. The Coalition Council voted to watch the recording before making any decisions. It took 4 hours. Nobody left the room. Sira had handed over the archive without conditions, the complete human record of the event they called the departure. 300 years of documented history, beginning with the first detection of what they called the Devourer, and ending with the last transmission from Earth's surface, before the evacuation fleet crossed beyond sensor range. Ion watched it in the council chamber with 23 other delegates, and she did not speak once. The early footage was bureaucratic, emergency sessions, scientists arguing in crowded rooms, data projections that kept being revised upward. The Devourer had entered the Milky Way from the intergalactic void, no origin point was ever identified, and it had no shape that the human instruments could agree on. What they could measure was what it left behind. The first system it passed through lost all organic mass in 9 days. No heat signature, no energy discharge. The matter did not burn. It disappeared, the way water disappears into dry ground. The humans had done something Ion found difficult to understand. They had not panicked, not collectively. There were riots in some footage, grief in most of it, but underneath all of that was a current of something she kept struggling to name. She finally decided the word was stubbornness. They built ships, not 1 ship or 10 ships. They stripped their outer planets of raw material, and they built thousands of vessels, and they filled those vessels with people, and they argued constantly about who would go and who would stay. The ones who stayed were volunteers. The footage of that selection process was the hardest part to watch. Families dividing, people stepping out of evacuation lines, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to, so that someone else could have their place. The rearguard action lasted 18 days. Ion did not have a precise cultural framework for what she was watching during those 18 days. The humans who stayed behind did not fight because they believed they would win. They fought to slow the Devourer's advance by an amount their scientists had calculated was necessary for the evacuation fleet to reach safe distance. They fought with that exact goal in mind, no more and no less, and they achieved it with 4 days to spare. The last transmission from Earth's surface was audio only. A single voice, calm, reading coordinates for a rendezvous point that was already 300 years out of date. When the recording ended, the council chamber was quiet for a long time. Subcommander Reth was the first to speak. His voice was different than it had been in the meeting room, flatter, like something had shifted inside him and had not yet settled. "Their technical specifications," he said. "I reviewed them last night." Ian looked at him. Every ship in that armada was engineered to fight this specific enemy, not a general-purpose combat fleet, not a multi-role force. He set down the data tablet he had been holding. They designed weapons around the Devourer's behavior patterns, hull materials that resist whatever process it uses to strip organic mass, navigation systems built for fighting inside a swarm rather than a formation. He paused. They have been building toward this engagement for 3 centuries. Every design choice, every resource allocation, every generation of their engineering program, all of it aimed at this. One of the younger council delegates, a Thavari named Vaughn, raised a tentative hand. "They said they were not ready until now. What does that mean exactly? What changed?" The question hung in the air. Ian did not have an answer. She suspected only one person did. She found Sira in one of the station's observation galleries, standing at the wide viewport with her hands behind her back, looking out at the stretch of stars that bordered the Vale's edge. Priya Osai was seated nearby, working quietly on a tablet. Neither of them was speaking. Ian stopped beside Sira. "Vaughn wants to know what changed," she said. "Why now?" Sira did not look away from the viewport. "The Devourer slowed when it finished with our system. We do not know why. Our best theory is that it processes what it consumes, that there is something biological in its cycle, even if the biology is alien to us. It spent nearly 80 years moving through uninhabited space before it reached the Vale's edge systems." She paused. "That 80 years was our window. We needed it. And now the window is closed. The Vale has been moving for 40 years. We have modeled the rate. At current pace, it reaches the first populated coalition system in approximately 14 months. Ian absorbed that. 14 months, less than 1 Thavari year. "You said you needed our space to fight," Ian said. "What does that mean?" Sira turned from the viewport. "The Devourer responds to mass concentrations. It moves toward density. The denser the population, the stronger the pull. Coalition space is dense, heavily populated, heavily trafficked." She met Ian's eyes. "We need to use that. We need to place the battle where we can shape the Devourer's approach vector, pull it into geometry we have prepared rather than geometry it chooses." "You want to use our worlds as bait." "I want to use the space between your worlds as a weapon," Sira said. "There is a difference. No inhabited system will be in the engagement zone, but I will need you to trust my positioning choices, even when they do not make sense to your tacticians." She held Ian's gaze. "Can you do that?" Ian thought about the recording, the family splitting at the evacuation lines, the last transmission. "I will try," she said. Sira nodded. It was a small nod, but Ian thought it might be the most honest response she had ever received in a diplomatic setting. The scout ships were Sira's idea. She had proposed it herself, in the 3rd joint planning session, when Reth's delegation was still arguing about whether the Vale was a natural boundary or a manufactured one. She had suggested sending 3 coalition vessels to verify the claims firsthand. She had provided the approach vector, the sensor parameters, and the recommended observation distance. She had also, very quietly, told Dren to have a recovery team standing by. Reth had objected to that last part. He said it implied doubt in coalition capabilities. Dren had said nothing. He simply noted the order and made sure the recovery team was exactly where Sira said it should be. The scout ships left the station on a Tuesday by coalition reckoning. They were expected back in 6 days. They came back in 4, and what returned was not what had left. The first wreck entered sensor range tumbling slowly, the way debris tumbles in low gravity with nothing to stop it. The hull was intact. The structure was completely undamaged. Every surface was clean, not scorched, not scarred, not melted. Just clean, like something had removed everything biological and left the shell. The second and third followed the same pattern. Hulls whole. Interior systems functional in 2 of the 3. No crew. No biological trace of any kind. The sensor data had been backed up to a relay beacon, which was how they knew the vessels had reached the Veil's boundary, had begun their sweep, and had then recorded something that lasted 47 seconds before the feed cut out. The Council watched the 47 seconds 3 times. The footage was difficult to interpret. The Devourer did not look like a fleet. It did not look like a phenomenon. It looked most closely like weather, a dark and shifting mass that moved without a leading edge, filling space the way a cloud fills sky, except that behind it everything the sensors detected had gone quiet. Not destroyed. Quiet. The readings were not readings of destroyed matter. They were readings of absent matter. On the third viewing, one of the Vorath analysts pointed out something no one had mentioned. In the corner of the frame, for approximately 3 seconds before the feed ended, there was a shape within the mass. Not a vessel, not a structure. A shape, roughly symmetrical, that seemed to orient itself toward the scout ships the way an eye orients toward a sound. Nobody spoke about that for a long time. Reth found Sira in the tactical room, already updating her positioning models. She had clearly expected the scouts to return in the condition they did, because she was not surprised. She was already working. "You knew," Reth said. Sira moved a marker on the display. "I knew what the data suggested. I needed you to see it. You used our ships to prove your point. I told you exactly where to send them and how close to go. If they had followed the parameters precisely, they would have made it back." She glanced at him. "They deviated on approach. I noted that risk in the briefing document." Her voice was not cold. It was simply factual. "I am sorry for your people." Reth looked at the display. A small red indicator showed new position data. The Veil's boundary had moved. 14 months had just become 9. "It is accelerating," he said. "It has reached a denser region of space. More mass means faster consumption means faster movement." Sira added 2 more markers. "We need to position now. Every week we wait changes the defensive geometry." The council session that followed lasted 11 hours. It was the most contentious meeting Ion had ever chaired. The arguments were not about whether to accept human military command. By hour 3, the scout data had settled that question. The arguments were about sovereignty, about what the coalition would owe humanity after, and whether any species should hold command authority over forces not their own. Priya Os sat through the entire session in the observer's gallery. Ion noticed her during a recess and walked over. 11 hours, Ion said. "You have not moved." "This is an important conversation," Priya said. "The arguing is useful data." Ion studied her. "How old are you?" 26, born on the Armada. My mother was born on the Armada. My grandmother was the last of my family to see Earth. Priya looked down at the council floor. "We do not think of it as sacrifice. The mission was always the return. Everything else was preparation." The vote passed 2 hours later. Unanimous in the end. The coalition formally granted Admiral Sira Voss command authority over all joint defensive operations, with full transfer of fleet deployment data, territory access, and logistical infrastructure. Sira received the notification in the tactical room. She read it once, set down the tablet, and returned to the positioning model without comment. Dren looked at the display over her shoulder. 9 months. 8 if it keeps accelerating. Sira moved a marker 3 systems inward. Start seeding the gravity anchors in the outer band. Get Priya on the pull ratios. Her mass modeling is the best we have. Dren went to find Priya. Sira stayed at the display, alone, and for a brief moment she placed her hand flat against the surface of the map. over the small marker that sat in the quiet region where the Milky Way's spiral arm curved inward, where Earth used to be. Then she moved the marker and got back to work. Nothing in the Coalition's recorded military history looked like what happened at the Veil's edge. Coalition wars had rules, not written rules but patterns every species fell into naturally. You approached, you formed lines, you exchanged fire until one side broke or both agreed the cost was too high. There were feints, retreats, regroupings. The Devourer did none of that. It arrived the way a tide arrives, filling space from every vector simultaneously. No front, no rear, no point of greatest pressure. Coalition sensor officers kept trying to find a command structure in its movement, a decision center, a flagship equivalent. There was nothing. The mass shifted as one body, moving toward density with the patience of something that had never once needed to hurry. Reth's battle group was assigned to the eastern perimeter. Sira had given him a simple instruction: hold position, do not advance, do not respond to probing contact, wait for the signal. Her strategy was a controlled bait, drawing the swarm into a prepared corridor where 17 axes of human fire could collapse its forward mass simultaneously. The geometry required everyone to hold their nerve. Reth had agreed in the briefing room, with the display in front of him and Sira's calm voice walking through the logic. Then a tendril of the Devourer reached his flank, and 3 of his ships went quiet in 40 seconds. He broke formation. He told himself it was tactical. He ordered his group 12,000 kilometers off-axis to engage the tendril directly, and for 4 minutes it worked. The tendril fragmented, and his weapons were having visible effect. Then the main mass adjusted. It turned toward his group the way that shape in the archive footage had turned, and Reth understood, in a way the briefing had not communicated, what it meant to be noticed by something that size. The human frigate appeared out of nowhere. It placed itself between Reth's command ship and the leading edge of the mass, and deployed something he had no classification for, a sequence of charges detonating in a pattern, not as weapons exactly, but as disruption, scrambling whatever signal the Devourer used to lock onto density targets. Its attention slid away. The frigate lost its main, engines doing it. Priya Osai's voice came over the joint channel before Reth could process what had happened. She coordinated the evacuation of the frigate crew with the same calm she used for mass modeling, directing rescue shuttles to specific airlocks, giving precise movement instructions to avoid the failing systems. The crew made it out, all of them. Sira's main engagement was already running. Reth pulled his sensors back to the central corridor. The human armada did not fight the Devourer the way any coalition species fought anything. They did not strike from the front. They folded around it, section by section, using the gravity anchors seeded over 8 weeks to bend the swarm's movement inward. Every time the mass tried to reorient toward a new target, a human formation was already positioned to redirect it. Every time it pushed outward, the human ships compressed the expansion back into the corridor. It was less like a battle and more like a process, like watching someone guide water through a channel they had built long ago. Sira gave orders in short, flat sentences, never raising her voice. Dren managed fleet positioning with a speed that suggested he was executing a plan so thoroughly rehearsed that his hands knew it before his mind did. The Devourer pushed back twice. Both times it found corridor walls and lost mass to the redirected strike pattern. When it finally retreated, not destroyed, not broken, but pulled back the way a wave pulls back before building again, the channel was quiet for the first time in 6 hours. Coalition losses: 41 ships, mostly vessels that had broken from assigned positions early. Human losses: 12 ships including the frigate. Reth sat in his command seat and did not speak for a long time. He was looking at the tactical replay, watching his own formation break, watching the human frigate appear 12 seconds later. 12 seconds. It had been positioned to respond in 12 seconds, which meant it had been close before the battle began. Sira had anticipated his deviation. She had placed a response asset near his group without telling him. She had known he might break. He requested a private channel to the human flagship. Sierra answered immediately. "You knew I would move," he said. "I thought you might," she said. "You should have told me. If I had told you I expected it, you would have held position out of pride. That would have made your decision slower, and the response window would have been too tight." A brief pause. Sometimes preparation works better when it is quiet. Reth closed the channel. He looked at his screen for a while. Then he opened a channel to his own officers and told them tomorrow's drill would cover corridor displacement tactics. It would cover them, he said, every day until the next engagement. One of his officers asked if he meant every day without exception. Reth thought about the 12 seconds. "Every day," he said. The final push did not announce itself. There was no buildup on sensors, no gathering signal, no change in behavior that gave the Coalition's analysts time to write a report. The Devourer simply stopped retreating. One moment the mass was pulling back from the corridor. The next, it reversed, and everything it had across the entire veil's edge reversed with it. Every tendril, every probe, every scattered fragment of the swarm folding back into one body and driving forward as a single weight. The Coalition's sensor grid went dark in 4 sectors simultaneously. Sierra was not surprised. Dren could tell because she was already at the sealed compartment in the flagship's tactical room, the one that had been welded shut since the Armada left deep space 8 months ago. She had the key on a physical cord around her neck, which was the only part of the plan she had never explained to anyone. Dren had noticed it the day they docked at the Coalition station and had not asked. She opened the compartment now. Inside was a single data drive and a handwritten document, which was unusual enough that Dren stared at it. Humans had not written things by hand in centuries. The act of it meant something specific to their culture, that the person writing it did not trust any digital system with the information, and did not want any record that could be copied, traced, or intercepted. Sierra plugged in the drive and began transmitting coordinates to 17 human vessels scattered across the outer band. She explained it to Dren while she worked, because he had earned that. The gravity anchors Priya's team had seeded were not just for redirecting the swarm's movement. 12 of them had a secondary function, a resonance trigger that, when activated in the correct sequence, would create a gravitational pull concentrated at a single point deep inside the corridor. Not a trap for ships, a trap for mass. Something large enough, moving fast enough toward a sufficiently dense gravity well, would not be able to stop. The physics of the Devourer's own consumption behavior, its instinct to move toward the greatest density, would do the final work. The problem was that the trigger required someone to be at the corridor's far end to activate the last anchor manually. The automated signal could not reliably punch through the Devourer's interference at that range. It had to be a ship, a crew, in person. Sierra had selected 12 volunteers, spread across 3 vessels, who had known about this part of the plan for 6 months. Dren read the manifest. He did not say anything. He had learned, over 300 years of recorded human history and 22 years of working beside Sierra specifically, that there were moments where language was not the right tool. The 3 ships went in while the rest of the Armada held the corridor walls. Ion watched from the Joint Command channel. She had stopped asking questions 3 hours into the engagement, partly because no one had time to answer and partly because she had realized that every question she wanted to ask had already been anticipated. Sierra's fleet moved like a single organism, each ship knowing its role so completely that the overall shape of the strategy only became visible from a distance, like a pattern that resolves when you stop looking at individual points. The 3 vessels reached the final anchor at the corridor's deep end and transmitted the activation sequence. The Devourer was already past the point of redirecting. The gravitational collapse took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The mass folded inward on itself, layer by layer, the consumption behavior the Devourer used against every system it had ever passed through turned inward, accelerating the process in a way that Priya's models had predicted, but no one had fully believed until they were watching it happen. The mass decreased. Then it decreased faster. Then, at the 2-minute mark, it stopped behaving like matter that could be sensed and started behaving like matter that was no longer present. In 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the devourer was gone. The corridor was quiet in a way that felt different from the quiet between engagements. It was the quiet of something finished rather than something paused. Ayan found Sira at the viewport again, in the same observation gallery where they had spoken after the first council session. The stars outside were steady and unchanged, which felt strange after everything. "The 3 ships," Ayan said. "Yes," Sira said. "The crews." "Yes." Ayan stood beside her. They did not speak for a while. Outside, coalition and human vessels moved slowly through the debris corridor, running checks that followed any engagement, ordinary and procedural, and quietly remarkable, because 2 months ago those ships would not have shared a channel without a full diplomatic session. "What do you do now?" Ayan asked. Sira was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had a quality Ayan had not heard from her before, not softer exactly, more settled like weight that had been set down. "We go home," she said. "Earth is not." "I know what Earth is." Sira turned from the viewport. "We go anyway. It will take time. A generation, maybe 2, but the mission was always the return, not the arrival." She paused. "The return just means we start the work." Priya Ose appeared in the doorway of the gallery. She had a tablet in one hand, and her expression was the careful calm Ayan had come to recognize as the human version of deep feeling held at a controlled distance. "Coordinates confirmed," Priya said. "3rd planet." Sira nodded. Priya logged it into the navigation system and walked away, already working on something else. Outside the viewport, in the direction of a small and ordinary star that sat in a quiet part of the spiral arm, a fleet of 15,000 ships began, slowly, to turn.